Hey fellas, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back out here in the shop tonight. I apologize for my somewhat disfigured and gruesome appearance. My swelling is still not quite all the way down. My right eye was swollen completely shut earlier today. Some of you may have already seen that. I got stung by a bee. But my Benadryl that I took for the swelling really knocked me out this afternoon, and I wasn't feeling very well. And long story short, I had put Billy's converter back together, and after I took a nap in there in the house today, I kind of felt like I should take it back apart and just double check, because Vicky was handing me all kinds of medications. I was on Benadryl and some other damn thing. I don't know what she gave me two of something else, but anyway, I wasn't feeling very well. I couldn't hardly see. And we have put these converters together once before, and I had a problem with the O-ring. My own fault, our own fault, I should say, not Hughes. It was our mistake in the way we assembled the converter, and the converter leaked. So after I woke up from having a little bit of a daydream slash daymare, I guess, I decided that after dinner tonight, after I can see a little better, and after some of the swelling had gone down, I decided I'd better take this converter back apart and just make sure the O-ring's okay. So let's get to it. I want to explain to you guys a little bit about the transmission that's in Billy's truck, the converter, and also the two-stage dump valve system. This is some pretty trick stuff, and we're very, very lucky that Hughes Performance believed in us and stepped up to the plate and helped us, because if it wasn't for Pete Nichols and Hughes Performance, Billy the Kid would not be where he is today. Billy's truck and our family as a whole probably would not be where we are today. So let's get to it. Let's dig into this converter, and I want to show you some tricks on this transmission that help us get down almost any surface very fast. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to start putting Billy's Hughes Performance bolt together torque converter back together. And this converter uses an O-ring seal that sits down into a lip or a receiver groove. And it's very important that you pay a little bit of attention to what I'm about to show you here, so that you don't make the same mistake that we've made. All right, so very, very, very important. One thing that you want to make sure of is that this mating surface is clean for your O-ring. Both mating surfaces need to be spotless. Ours are not. Now they are. There's a little speck of dirt. The other thing you want to make sure of is that when you put this thing together, this is the side that goes towards the engine. Okay, this is the side that goes towards the engine. When you lay your sprag and your mechanical diode down in there, it only ratchets one way. It freewheels one way, and you want to make sure that it freewheels to the right. That's very important. You'll be taking this thing back apart if that doesn't freewheel to the right. It'll engage to the left, freewheel to the right. Okay? So what I'm going to do here real quick is I want to put just a little bit of grease down in this lip to hold this O-ring, because what you can do, and what we have done, if you don't put a little bit of grease down in this machine groove for the O-ring, when you go to put this converter back together, you may have to tap on it a little bit to get both halves to drop together. And if you tap on it, that O-ring, let me show you what happens. See that? Did you catch that?
Yeah.
What happens is, if you tap on that converter with a hammer, which is pretty common to get it to go together, all you have to do is just barely tap on this thing. Watch this, watch the O-ring. See how that O-ring jumped up out of the groove? And you won't see that when you're bolting the converter down and cinching the bolts down tight, and you will absolutely have a massive transmission fluid leak. And we don't want that. We've had that, we've done this, we've learned from experience what not to do. So I'm gonna go grab a little bit of grease. I'm gonna put just a little bit of grease around this groove for the O-ring, and then we'll put it back together. This stuff won't hurt the transmission at all. If it gets a little bit down inside, it ain't gonna bother anything. It's just a precautionary thing here. I should have done this earlier today, but I was hopped up on Benadryl and couldn't see anything, so we're gonna do this a little bit better because everybody deserves to have some useful knowledge. If you're a glutton for punishment and you're watching this channel, I think I'd owe it to somebody to do something decent. Okay, now all right, so I'm just going to take this rag and wipe the excess grease off. All we want is just a little bit of grease down inside that recessed channel for the O-ring. Okay, now take the O-ring, lay it down in there, and you'll notice that it drops in that receiver groove much easier with a little bit of grease in there. Okay. Now the O-ring doesn't really want to lay in there very well. Generally they're just a little bit long. But once you get it in there and get it to relax, it should be fine. Now I notice on this O-ring is smooth all the way around until I get right here, and then it feels coarse. So I don't like that. I'm going to try and rotate that O-ring a little bit. I'll put it back in the other way and see if it'll... Now the O-ring's got plenty of grease on it anyway, so if there is a coarse edge on the O-ring, you want to pay attention to that. You want to try and keep that down in that receiver groove. It won't harm anything if it's down in the receiver groove, but if it's trying to mate against a flat surface, it may give trouble. Okay, now I can feel the O-ring is smooth all the way around. There's no rough edges. It is trying to jump out just a tiny bit right there. It's pretty common. Now watch what happens when I tap it with a hammer. See, O-ring didn't move. Before, you just barely tap it and that O-ring would jump right up out of there. Now I feel confident that when we put this thing together and we tap it together, this O-ring will stay where it's supposed to be, and we will not have to pull the transmission out again, and my son won't hate me. All right, so we found our 3 dots here, our 3 dots here. So we're going to take the turbine side of the converter, and we're going to line up. See this dowel pin right here where my thumb is? That dowel pin lines up in that hole right there. Okay. Just be very careful. Set it down gently. Just try and squeeze it together, and it dropped right down. I didn't even have to tap on it with a hammer. Perfect. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and start putting our converter bolts back in. Now, make sure when you do this that the threads are clean, which I've already done that because I've already had this apart earlier today. But it is imperative that these threads are clean. They do not have thread locker in them or anything like that. I don't recommend using thread locker, and I'll explain why. We did that once, and the problem that we had was that as you put thread locker on these threads and you thread that down in, the thread locker actually gets between the 2 halves of the converter. As you thread that in there, that thread locker spreads out, gets between the 2 halves, And as it sets up, it holds the two halves of the converter apart and takes pressure off the O-ring. So, in my personal opinion, based on my experience, I do not recommend using thread locker on these converter bolts. Just put them back together, snug them down good. There's a torque spec for them, but since we're a bunch of Yahoo rednecks, we generally don't torque them. We usually just run them down with that little impact, little 3/8 impact. I'm not saying that we do things the right way, I'm just telling you this is how we do it, and you don't have to do it the way we do it. I probably would recommend that you not do things the way we do them, but that's how we do it. Make sure you start these bolts in by hand. You don't want to just set them in there and hit them with an impact. No ugga-duggas, right? Make sure they all thread by hand easily. Make sure they're not cross-threaded. Okay. Just take this little 3/8 impact. Just snug one on this side. Snug one on that side. And start working your way around. All right, so while Billy is over there working on finishing up bolting the converter together, I'm gonna go ahead and take a few minutes. God, I look terrible. I hate to do this like this. I'm gonna take a few minutes to go over this transmission and explain to you some of the options that are in this transmission. Most importantly, the two-stage dump valve system that we use from Hughes Performance. Okay, this is our Vickers Performance Transmissions Battle Axe Power Glide. It is a 180 low gear, straight cut gear set. Transmission built by Dion Vickers at Vickers Performance Transmissions in Alliance, Ohio. It's held up very well. Some of the options that you cannot see are the 180 straight cut gear set, low gear, and it also has a 10 disc high gear clutch. At approximately 12 to 1300 horsepower is wheel horsepower, I should say, is about the limit for an 8 disc clutch. You'll need to go to a 10. Ask me how I know. So, the one thing I want to cover here real quick, and forgive me because our stuff is junk and it's held together with zip ties, is our Hughes Performance two-stage dump valve system. Now, what does this do? Here we go. If you are familiar with trying to get just the right converter for your application, you know how tricky it is to get the stall speed just specifically just right for your combination for a certain track condition. Now, a lot of people only run prep track, but we don't. We actually street race this truck quite a bit. We no prep this truck quite a bit, and we'll go from an incredibly well prepped smooth surface to the back road in the middle of the night on chip and tar, and it's just terrible. And everything in between from those two options will require a different stall speed for maximum performance and the quickest ET. So what we have here is a two-stage dump valve system. You have an internal dump valve that returns back, and you have an external dump valve right here out of the cooler line. What this does, is it basically gives us 3 different converters in one converter. Now I'm going to explain that to you in just a second. So what I mean by we basically have 3 converters in one is that we can either run this thing with the dump valves closed, we can run them with one dump valve closed and one open, we can run it with both dump valves open. Okay, there's 3 different combinations there that offer basically 3 different stall speeds. The beauty of this is that they can be changed immediately during the pass. Now, we use a Hughes Performance Transmissions dump valve controller in the truck. It's basically it's built by Leash Electronics for Hughes, and it's just like a progressor for a nitrous system. operates the same way, only backwards, and that it progresses closed instead of open. So let me show you something real quick. Okay, this is our HUGHES Performance, what they call the dumpster control. And you can set this up so that it opens and closes one or both of the dump valves based on time after the trans brake has been released. So if you have a shift point of say 2 seconds, and you would like to open the dump valves to soften up, if you would like to open the dump valves to soften up the gear change so that it doesn't knock the tires off, you can do that. You just simply program your shift time, and then you program your dump valves to open prior to that. Billy, what's your normal dump valve opening time? Just give me a scenario.
So let's say I'm at Marion County Raceway and I know the transition from concrete to asphalt is at 1.8 seconds, approximately 150 feet out, 140 feet out. Usually what I would do in that scenario is I would open the dump valves before that transition, because it takes time for the converter to cavitate and to lose that fluid. So basically I would open those dump valves at about 0.7 seconds, and then I would close them at around 2.2 seconds just to get over the transition. And it also takes time for the converter to actually gain that fluid back again. So it's not like a hard transition from dumping the fluid to fully
charging the circuit.
Charging it. So it's kind of like it's an easy transition, but you definitely want to open them a little bit before whatever you're trying to get over.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, like if I close the dump valves at say 2.2 seconds or 2.3 seconds, it's really going to soften the shift point even at 2.6, because it's not fully charged. So
I want to explain real quick what Billy means by cavitation. Cavitation, what we are describing as cavitation, is basically starving the converter for a certain percentage of transmission fluid from the charge circuit, okay? What that means is you're just basically returning a portion of the charge circuit oil or fluid that would normally go to the converter. We're taking some of that, a portion of that or a percentage of that charge circuit oil, and returning it back to the pan and not letting it go to the converter. What that basically does is it softens the converter, or it changes the stall speed. Okay? Now the beauty of doing it this way is that we can do it on the go. Okay? We can let this thing leave with a stator combination and turbine combination, a converter combination, that's capable of going 1 60 foot. It takes a fairly tight converter with a 370 gear ratio, 3,300 pound truck, and a 180 low gear. So that takes a very tight converter to make that happen, and a lot of power, of course. However, we can leave and go 120, 60 foot on a track that won't hold the power out the back. Just like he said at Marion County, where the transition's at about 120 feet, we can make sure we open the dump valves before that, starve the converter for a little bit of charge circuit fluid, and we can leave going 120, 60 foot, and then open the dump valves, let it shift, and the truck thinks it's got a converter that's 600 or 800 RPM looser. And really, we're not specifically trying to kill RPM. What we're trying to take away is wheel horsepower, but most importantly, wheel torque. In other words, the amount of torque we are putting to the rear wheels on that gear change. Okay? So basically, we have 3 converters in this truck at all times. But it's not an A to B or cut. It's not black and white. It's not like you just open the valve and shut the valve and it goes from one extreme to the other. It's not like that. It takes time to cavitate the converter, and it takes time to refill the converter. So it's just one of those things that you have to do. You have to use trial and error, which we have a lot of error for all our trials. But that's what dump valve systems do. Now, as I was going over the dump valve system, I gave you guys some scenarios that we would use the dump valves for. There are others. There are other different things that you can use the dump valves for. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a combination, say it's a nitrous combination. Nitrous combinations invariably leave hard. They're violent when they leave. They have to be, because in order to ET the same as a turbo car that generally will run more mile an hour, they have to 60 foot harder. And that puts them at risk of wheel stands, because you're trying to bring in a very violent power adder very quickly into the run. So what I'm going to tell you here is that don't think that dump valves are specifically for turbo cars. Turbo cars use them a lot, but a nitrous car can also do well with one. If you have a combination that's right on the edge with your suspension setup and your wheelbase and your power management, and it tends to want a wheel stand, especially as the sun's going down. If you get caught in the lanes and the sun's starting to go down and shade's hitting one lane and not the other, and you know for a fact that one lane's going to be faster than the other and you don't know which lane you're going to be in, this is a saving grace, because you can hook 1 or 2 dump valves to an override button on the steering wheel, and your driver can engage those dump valves in the event the car starts to wheel stand, if the front end starts to get too high. Or you can even use a PCM. I'm sure a lot of the cars with Holley systems and VPS systems and those types of things are there. You can program them to do this, but we're kind of old school. We have to do everything the hard way, learn the hard way. But at any rate, however you want to turn the dump valves on, whether you want to use a Holley system or some kind of an engine management system, or if you want to do it the way I would do it and just leave it up to the driver and let him feel the car. If you've got a nitrous car or any car that tends to wheel stand a little bit, you can put an override button on the steering wheel, and when the driver senses the car is going to wheel stand, or if it's coming up too fast, too high, the driver can grab that override, and instead of trying to make the car go faster, you're opening the dump valves, taking some of that torque multiplication away from the rear axle and a little bit of the horsepower, and you can actually set the car down using dump valves. You set the front end down, and then once it's starting to come down, you can let off the button. Sometimes you might only have to blip the button. You might just barely touch the button. But there's all different ways to utilize these dump valve systems in both nitrous and turbo applications. So just some food for thought.
It's a brand new pump, brand new seal, so I'm sure it's going to go in a little hard.
So I want to show everybody what we broke. Our old pump had a pinned stator support tube. This is the stator support, okay? And this is your input shaft. And our old pump had a pinned stator support. Basically, it had 2 screws or 2 bolts that held the pin in the pump and kept it from turning. The stock ones were just pressed in, but ours had 2 bolts or 2 pins. This one actually bolts into the pump. Ultra heavy duty, relatively expensive, but what are you going to do, right? So Dion took the transmission apart, everything looked good in it, but he went ahead and replaced basically the front pump and put in this bolt-in stator support. So we're ready to go. We're ready to slide the converter in. Did you put a little bit of fluid in that?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. You got to get the input shaft into the sprag. Did he put a new input shaft in it too? Okay, there it went in. Now, we've got the input shaft into the sprag, and the stator support should be fairly well lined up. Now what we're going to do is we have to wait for the turbine hub to line up with the pump gears. And when that happens, it'll fall back considerably farther. All right, so the converter slid all the way back. Unfortunately, we didn't video it, but it's all the way back in. It's ready to go in. All right, so we got the truck up on the lift. We're gonna start running this thing up underneath the truck. One thing I wanted to point out to everybody was our transmission vent. This is an aftermarket kit. This is the transmission vent tube, and it goes down to a little recovery tank here bolted to the transmission pan. That's just in case we get the transmission scalding hot and the fluid boils and it happens to vent out that transmission vent at the top of the case. If that should happen, the fluid goes into a recovery tank and not down underneath the truck and on the ground and all over the road or all over the track. All right, we're back. Looks like Junior's got the transmission up in there. He's got the cross member in. Looks like the transmission cooler lines are hooked up. Transmission dipstick is installed. What do you got left to do? A little bit of wiring and converter bolts?
Yeah, just finish bolting this converter or the
Cross member. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up for tonight. I'll take some more video later this evening, but this video is getting pretty long. It looks like it's already like 26 minutes long, and those take forever to upload. And I'm not so sure there's that many people that's really gonna watch this. I don't know, I could be wrong. All the way through anyway. Some people click on it, just click right out. But anyway, if you've ever been interested in the dump valve systems, if anything that I have offered to you tonight and information interests you, I strongly suggest getting a hold of Pete Nichols at HUGHES Performance. He knows every transmission, he knows every part number, he knows every intricate detail of everything that they sell. It's incredible. He's literally a walking encyclopedia for transmission parts. He's done it himself, hands-on. He can build the transmissions. He can promote the transmissions. He can do social media for the transmissions. He's an incredible person, and we're very, 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 very thankful for his friendship and his help. So that's going to do it for tonight, folks. Remember, like and subscribe. Follow on Instagram, HUGHES Performance. Get a hold of Pete Nichols. He's the man for converters, transmission parts. If you're local here in Ohio and you need a local builder, someone you can rely on, it's tough to beat. Dion Vickers at Vickers Performance Transmissions in Alliance, Ohio. Get a hold of these guys. They do good work. See you, everybody.